Humans have been drinking cow's milk for centuries, so why, in the last 125 years, have we started to pasteurize it? Follow me down the rabbit hole about the dairy industry. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about the dairy industry. Thank you, Will, Carter, and Katie, for requesting this episode. I am also very interested in this topic. We drink raw milk in my house, but we will get more into that towards the end of the episode. But of course, before we get started, I love to thank our sponsors. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring my podcast. Guys, if you want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for $50 a month, that's so cheap. Go to rabbithole.gold right now. And supporting our sponsors is one of the best ways to support this podcast, so we really appreciate it. Let's get into the history. So humans have been drinking cow's milk for more than 10,000 years. This started with the domestication of goats, sheep, and cattle during the Neolithic or agricultural revolution. It started in the Fertile Crescent region, which is modern day like Middle East, and parts of Europe and South Asia. Leading up to this, humans were still in the hunter-gatherer stage and only drank milk from their moms in infancy, rarely drinking milk any other stage of life after infancy. We have archaeological evidence of milk processing through residue analysis of ceramics from Anatolia 9,000 years ago. So they started domesticating large mammals about 10,000 years ago, and it is assumed that that's when the milking started, but actual evidence goes back at least 9,000 years. In fact, in Europe, about 8,000 years ago, we find evidence of cheese processing. Ceramics in Libya point to milk processing about 7,000 years ago, and in Kazakhstan, 5,500 years ago. Analysis of dental calculus revealed people were either drinking milk or some other lactase-rich drink 5,000 years ago. Why we started drinking milk is a whole different question in itself, because it seems weird that one day they just woke up, looked at their cow, and was like, I wonder what their milk tastes like. I'm not saying that nobody did that. I'm sure there was one or two people out there that was like, curious. But in general, people probably didn't think that. There are a couple different theories as to why they started drinking milk from animals. What makes the most sense to me is that they were having food shortages and needed substance to get by. There may have been droughts, poor harvest, or just during the winter season when they weren't actively growing food that they needed to supplement with something else, and milk was readily available. Milk literally could have meant the difference between life and death, especially for children and the elderly. Another theory is just the domestication theory. With the domestication of animals and humans settling in one place and farming, they could have begun to experiment with animal products beyond what the meat could provide just to see what they could make, which makes sense because at the time, they weren't necessarily drinking the milk all the time. They were more consuming it in a yogurt form or in a cheese form. They didn't start just drinking cow's milk for thousands of years after they started producing it. They would, I guess that's not true. They would drink it a little bit, but that wasn't the main way they were using the milk. The mainstream narrative is that they started drinking cow's milk for reliable nutrition, which I'm not saying is wrong. Milk is high in fat, sugar, protein, vitamins, and minerals, and it's consistent, right? So as long as you have a cow and you're milking it every day, you will have milk. The problem that I have with this theory is that they might not have known or have had the knowledge of nutritional facts at that time. So yes, the correlation between health and food was made very early. The Egyptians documented the use of fermented food and herbs as early as 3000 BC, and the Indian Ayurvedic text from 1500 BC described food as medicine and emphasized having a balanced diet. And the Greek physician Hippocrates stated, quote, "Let food be thy medicine," in 400 BC. But that doesn't mean that they knew what nutritional benefits came from what food. They just knew that food played a very vital role in our health. That's not to say that multiple or all of these theories together can't be correct. It could be all the things. Either way, it wasn't long after the introduction of milk into the human diet that they started making other dairy products like cheese, yogurt, butter, and kefir, as the evidence suggests. This was likely because these products lasted much longer than fresh milk, were easier to digest than raw milk, and reduced the risk of spoilage and illness. They were trying to find a way to preserve the foods they had for as long as possible. Needing easier ways to digest the milk was very important because originally almost all humans were lactose intolerant after childhood. Like they could ingest their mother's milk and then they lost the ability to produce lactase. Lactase is the enzyme that digests lactose. Lactose is the sugar found in dairy products, just so we kind of understand what's going on here. Historically, humans lost their ability to digest lactose after weaning from their mothers. Then, about 5 to 7,000 years ago, genetics changed this. A genetic mutation appeared that allowed some humans to keep producing lactase after weaning and on into adulthood. People with this mutation were often chosen over people without this mutation to breed with because if a person could drink milk, they could consume more calories, they were healthier during famines, and had better survival and reproduction rates. This led to a rapid spread of the mutation because they were breeding those people more frequently. This lactase persistence mutation popped up in the Old World about 5 different times, mostly affecting Northern Europe, some African pastoralist tribes, and parts of the Middle East. Why did cow's milk get so popular over other animals' milk? Mostly because of the large quantities of milk the cows produced. They supported more than just one person on a daily milking, which was good for big families. Plus, cows thrive in many different climates, making them more durable. So, over time, cows replaced goats and sheep as the primary dairy source in many cultures. And thus, milk became a staple in the human diet. However, the Industrial Revolution changed the dairy industry drastically. The Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain around the 1760s and gradually spread to continental Europe and then to the United States by 1840. It was a global transition period toward more widespread, efficient, and stable manufacturing practices. While cities existed long before factories, the Industrial Revolution caused rapid urban growth as factories concentrated jobs in one place, drawing large populations and expanding many modern cities. Cities were growing faster than infrastructure, and milk was traveling a great distance before actually getting to the consumers. This was the first reason that people were actually getting sick from milk is because they used to get their milk and then drink it pretty quickly after it was milked from the cow. But this expansion was causing delays in the consumption of the milk because it took a couple days for them to even get the milk initially, and then it wouldn't last as long. So people were starting to get sick. To meet the new demands of the growing populations, distilleries started popping up in major cities. Milk and spirits were of the top beverages because milk was such an important part of the human diet at that point. Turns out, cows actually will eat the byproducts of spirit distillation. So it seemed perfect, right? They needed this milk and they wanted spirits. People were drinking beer, spirits, all the things. They would just feed the cows the barley after it was used to brew the beer. And then they could save loads of money because they're like, perfect. It's a 2 for 1. We get to use it for the milk and for the beer. However, this was not what was best for the cows. Cows need grass. And up until this point, they didn't know any different. They had always been eating grass. That's why they were so surprised when the cows would eat the byproduct from brewing the beer. Really, any living creature thrives best in its natural environment, and up until this point, most people were getting their milk from either their own cow or from a local farmer who had cows. These cows were living in pastures and eating grass like a cow does. But once they were brought to the cities, they were living in these really confined spaces. The sanitation was super minimal because at the time, sanitation wasn't even really a consideration, and they were standing in their own filth a lot of the time. They weren't living in pastures like they historically were. They weren't living in their normal habitat. And this mixed with the little nutritional value that they were getting from the used barley and whatever other byproducts they were being fed, the cows were getting really sick. So sick that in some illustrations from the time, the cows were literally being held up by a harness and pulley system from the ceiling so that way the farmers could milk it. They literally couldn't even stand. They were so sick. And on top of the cows being sick, the workers handling the milk were dirty too. They didn't wash their hands, just wasn't common practice back then, and they really had no regard for sanitation in any way. They weren't getting rid of the cow poop, they were just letting the cows stand in it. It was just filthy all around. And then they were giving this milk to you to drink. Mothers were giving it to their babies because children were used to drinking milk. Sick cows were then producing what was called swill milk. It was this pale, bluish milk that was unfit for butter or cheese making. The only way to drink it was to thicken it with starch and eggs, whiten it with plaster of Paris, and then sweeten it with molasses. And that only made it very, barely tolerable. And people noticed the difference because they're used to drinking fresh, raw milk. Nevertheless, the milk was marketed as country fresh. They weren't concerned with the health of the cows at all, or even the health of the people drinking the milk. They were only concerned about their profit margins, how cheaply they could produce the milk, and how much they could then sell it for, because that made their profit margins larger. During the same time as the Industrial Revolution, there was the expansion westward in the United States. This started in the early 1800s with the Louisiana Purchase and with the Lewis and Clark expedition, but continued on through the 1800s. And in frontier areas along the Ohio River Valley, cows began eating a plant called white snake root or richweed. It almost looks like baby's breath. It's this plant with little white flowers, and most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. The plant and its properties were unfamiliar to settlers because they just had never encountered it before, and they didn't know that they shouldn't let their cows eat it. But also, the cows are just grazing as they're being moved across the country. Little did they know, this plant was poisoning the cows with tramadol and in turn, their meat and their milk. The illness from this was called milk sickness or tramadol vomiting. The symptoms included tremoring, vomiting, and severe intestinal pain. In animals, tramadol poisoning is known as trembles because they would get fine muscle tremors in their nose and their flanks and their legs. However, there are other signs of this poisoning as well. So the animals will show initial signs of depression, reluctance to move or eat, and just general inactivity, especially when like the animals were moving before. Now all of a sudden they're not moving. That's kind of a red flag. Then they would get the trembles and vomiting would start. And as the condition progresses, they develop a stiff gait, altered posture, muscle weakness, inability to stand, and they could go into a coma and then potentially die. And it wasn't just people that was getting sick from the cows drinking this milk, because they would drink the milk, they'd get tramadol poisoning. Then their calves would come and nurse. The calves would get sick, and oftentimes they would die as well because the milk was poisoning them. Milk sickness claimed the lives of thousands of people in the Midwest. So, for the first time in history, people started getting really sick from the milk they were drinking. And this all kind of happened all the same time in the 1800s. You have milk traveling long distances. You've got unsanitary practices of the milk production, and you've got these cows eating things that they've never eaten before that is actually poisoning them and causing them to get really sick, and in turn, poisoning the people that are drinking the products. And as far as cities go, no one seemed to make the connection that this was the first time that they weren't personally milking the cows or buying the milk from a local farmer where they could actually put eyes on the cow and see it. Before the milk processing plants were a thing, people could verify the health of the cow they were getting their milk from, so they could see that the cows were healthy. By the mid-1800s, milk was linked to alarming rates of illness and death, particularly in infants and in children. Mothers continued to feed their children swill milk, not knowing that it was making their kids sick. They knew it tasted weird, but they didn't really know why. People were getting tuberculosis, typhoid fever, cholera, diphtheria, and scarlet fever from contaminated milk. In New York City during 1870, the infant mortality rate rose 20% and stayed there for the next 4 years. And that's only one example of how sick people were getting from this milk. This is where pasteurization comes in. And it makes a lot of sense when you put all these pieces together. People are like, the milk is making us sick. We have to do something about it. Pasteurization is named after the French microbiologist Louis Pasteur, whose research in the 1860s demonstrated that thermal processing would deactivate unwanted microorganisms in wine. So this process was soon to be used in milk. Firstly, pasteurization is the process of food preservation in which packaged foods are treated with a mild heat to eliminate pathogens and extend shelf life. This process either destroys or deactivates microorganisms and enzymes that contribute to food spoilage or the risk of disease. In 1882, the first commercial pasteurizer for milk was developed in Germany. This product was based off of Louis Pasteur's research. However, Pasteur never pasteurized milk. He only ever used it for wine. Everybody else was using it for milk. They based it on his research, but he never intended it for milk. And Pasteur was not the first person to use heat to kill bacteria, but prior to him, heat treatments involved high temperature and often prolonged periods of heating to achieve sterilization. Although safety and qualities were improved, this method often changed the taste and texture of the product. For most foods, this didn't really matter because they were packaged, they were solid, but it did really matter for milk because sterilized milk had a very different taste to fresh milk. Pasteurized milk is heated for a relatively short time and then rapidly cooled. So it's kept cool, it's heated up, and then it's rapidly cooled again. Regular pasteurized milk is heated to 161 degrees for about 15 seconds. Ultra pasteurized milk is heated to a higher temperature. I can't remember exactly which one. And it's only heated to that temperature for 2 seconds until they rapidly cool it. And that's the difference between like ultra pasteurization and regular pasteurization when you're in the grocery store looking at those things. Commercial pasteurizing machines for milk were introduced in the US in 1895. The first major commercial use of pasteurized milk occurred in 1897 when the New South Wales Fresh Food and Ice Company in Australia advertised its pasteurized milk and started its campaign towards this method. Milk pasteurization became widespread in the US in the 1920s with the creation of the Standard Milk Ordinance, which was developed by the US Public Health Service. In the US, there was also another approach to the dirty milk problem. Dairies needed to be certified clean by the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions. They would get inspections and had to commit to wiping teats before and after milking, washing hands, and sterilizing milk utensils. Things that totally make sense to us, but just wasn't commonplace back in the day. Unfortunately, being certified clean was a lot more expensive than pasteurization was, even though at the time it seemed like citizens were pushing more for this option because they were used to raw milk and wanted to keep drinking it that way. Plus, the idea of cooked milk just really did not appeal to the general public. They understood that cooking the milk would kill everything in the milk, not just the bad bacteria. It also kills the good bacteria. This is when campaigns re-educating the public about pasteurized milk started to be plastered everywhere, with promises of scientific progress and methods they could trust. The campaigns really never stopped after that. The people weren't buying in initially, but after celebrity endorsements, milk campaigns, and a lot of government funding, public opinion did start to sway. Babe Ruth was one of the first celebrities to be used in a milk advertisement, but was definitely not the last. In 1946, Lord Victor Rothschild introduced a motion to the House of Lords that pushed the institutionalization of pasteurized milk in the UK, emphasizing how dangerous raw milk is and that it's a source of serious disease and death in the UK. Some lords did push back a little bit due to the economic concerns on small producer retailers and the technical challenges, but ultimately, most lords were for the idea, which makes you wonder, how much money did the Rothschild family stand to gain from this move to pasteurization? Were they the money man behind it? And I actually looked it up because I wanted to know, but it's so long ago, and most of the sources say it was like government funded, which I don't fully buy into, but they don't have a specific money trail in the 1940s. To this day, raw milk still has the reputation for being unsafe. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention says improperly handled raw milk is responsible for nearly 3 times more hospitalizations than any other foodborne disease source, making it one of the world's most dangerous food products. And when I read that, that's why I went to Instagram and I asked you all, if you drink raw milk, have you ever gotten sick from it? Because we do drink raw milk. We've never gotten sick from it. And everybody that I know that drinks raw milk has not gotten sick from it. But I was like, maybe I just haven't figured it out. Maybe I just haven't met somebody that drinks raw milk and gets really sick from it. None of you have either. And in fact, any government-run site will tell you the same thing. They're all pushing this narrative that raw milk is dangerous and should be avoided at all costs. Although pasteurizing the milk doesn't destroy the vitamins and minerals found in the milk, it does kill all bacteria, good and bad. The largest concentration of bacteria in your body is found in your gut. And we're talking like up to 1,000 species of bacteria. The gut is critical in digesting nutrients and fiber, regulating your immune system. It affects the central nervous system, which controls brain function and protects the body against microbes and toxin that can cause harm to you. An imbalance of healthy and unhealthy microbes is sometimes called gut dysbiosis and can contribute to weight gain. The gut has been called the second brain because it contains more than 100 million neurons, which is more than either the spinal cord or the peripheral nervous system. In fact, about 90% of the fibers in the vagus nerve carry information from the gut to the brain, not the other way around. So the gut can influence our mood, depression, anxiety, and so much more about our body. It is imperative to your health that you have a healthy gut microbiome. A study published in the National Library of Medicine on May 19th, 2020 concluded, quote, intake of unpasteurized milk and dairy products appear to be associated with the growth of the probiotic bacterial genesis Lactobacillus in the human gut. Lactobacillus is a friendly microbe that has been found to be helpful against things like IBS, colic in babies, intestinal inflammation, gastritis, which is like stomach pain, hay fever, allergies, candida, liver disease, gallbladder problems, constipation and diarrhea, arthritis, yeast infections, and UTIs. And in the study, they found a significant increase in lactobacillus. That could be huge for some people with gut issues, but also is good for just the everyday person to keep their gut in check so they don't start to have gut issues. And according to the experts, the best place to get this microbe is from fermented foods. But the study proved that raw milk is also a great place to get this microbe. Outside of the benefits we are not getting from drinking pasteurized milk, it's also hard to say what they may be adding to the milk when they pasteurize it. There are some milks that are fortified with vitamins A and D, and while fortification isn't necessarily bad, there are some issues with it that we should talk about. For example, it could lead to the overconsumption of certain nutrients. In this case, vitamin A and D toxicity are pretty rare, but it could happen if someone is taking a lot of supplements and then drinking fortified milk as well. But overconsumption could also lead to other things like liver damage. Fortification of vitamin A is not required for all milks. However, reduced fat and skim milks are required to be fortified with vitamin A at a minimum of 2,000 international unit or IU, but it's optional for whole milk. Not to say that they're not doing it for whole milk, it's just not required. All fluid pasteurized milk must be fortified with vitamin D at a minimum of 400 IU. This is standard practice in the US, and it makes you wonder what else they could potentially put in your milk. I did look in to see if they could potentially put vaccines in milk because I know that's a big concern right now with them putting different things in our food. As of right now, it's not possible because of the temperatures vaccines have to be kept at in order to be viable. But that doesn't mean that it won't be possible in the future. At the time pasteurization was first coming around, it did make a lot of sense because there was a lot of different issues with the milk. Totally makes sense to keep the milk safe. But now we know a lot more about germs and sanitary practices and what was making the cows and in turn the milk actually sick. So why are they still pushing this narrative that raw milk is unsafe and dangerous? It just doesn't make any sense until you get down to the grassroots of it. Food independence. If you can get milk straight from your local farmer, there is no need for massive processing plants, national distribution systems, or corporate middlemen. It comes down to the money and the power. Pasteurization centralizes power. It forces milk through facilities that require licenses, inspections, equipment, and capital, most of which small farmers can't or just won't afford. And that pushes food production into the hands of large corporations that are easier for governments to regulate, tax, and influence. It also allows for the dependency on industrial systems to continue. The big milk corporations don't have to be accountable for the health of their animals because it doesn't matter. They can fix any issues with the milk after the fact, which means they can treat the animals really poorly. They can keep them in a facility on concrete instead of pastures or in pastures that don't actually have any grass in them. And they can feed them the cheapest thing because it just doesn't matter. They're going to pasteurize the milk anyway. You wouldn't know if this cow was sick. Instead of demanding healthier cows and cleaner farms, people are so removed from the process that the system tolerates overcrowding, stressed animals, and just lower standards in general. This keeps industrial agriculture profitable while eliminating competition from small, higher quality farms. And then, when people do go to local farmers and the farmers are charging more for a half gallon of milk than what you would pay at the grocery store for a full gallon of milk, people are getting mad. They're like, I don't want to pay the higher prices to get this raw milk. But also, the practices to get that raw milk are typically more sanitary and better for the cow and better for you than whatever you're buying at the grocery store. But also, knowing your local farmer and building that relationship with them means you trust them more, which means you will start opting out of the corporate food pyramid more and more. Honestly, it's a slippery slope. Once you go to local food sources for your food instead of getting it from the store, you start to realize there's a lot of things you can make yourself. You start making your own bread. You start buying your milk locally, buying your eggs locally. You start buying local meat. You start going to the grocery store less, frankly. Pasteurization makes milk easier to standardize, modify, and fortify, which we talked about. Once the milk is processed, it can be skimmed, recombined, homogenized, branded, marketed. It's now a controlled commodity rather than a natural food. This way, they can align it with their dietary guidelines, school programs, and industrial feeding systems, which are all government run, by the way. And on top of all of this, it reinforces trust in institutions over personal judgment. The message becomes you are not qualified to decide what's safe for yourself, what's safe for your family. Only the experts and regulators are. And so many people have bought into this now that they will tell you you can't drink raw milk. It will make you sick. They don't even know that raw milk is not making people sick. They don't even know the history behind why pasteurization started. They are just so bought in to the pasteurization that they don't even look past it. Buying raw milk challenges the system. It's pushing back by implying that individuals can assess risk on their own, know their source, and make informed decisions without the input of the government. We don't need them to make our decisions. We can make our own decisions. Raw milk isn't dangerous. They just want you to continue to rely on them. But there is really good news. Raw milk is not illegal. Contrary to popular belief, most people think it's illegal. It's not. There are 4 states in which the sale or distribution of raw milk for human consumption is illegal. So if you live in those 4 states, you have to get raw milk somewhere else, or you should just move. In 33 states, retail sales or on-farm sales are legal. Now, on-farm sales look different in each state, so you need to look up the laws specifically in your state. In my state, we have on-farm sales, which literally means you can go to a farm and buy milk, but also it means that milk can be delivered to you. We were buying milk for a little while where it was a delivery service, but it was delivered to a parking lot where we would go and pick it up. So they didn't actually bring it to my house, although that's an option as well. But I'm here to tell you that raw milk tastes very similar to pasteurized milk. I can't actually tell the difference. My husband can a little bit. I can tell when the milk is kind of on its last legs. So when it's starting to turn, it has this cheesy taste. It just tastes a little off. And that's when we just decide not to drink that milk anymore. We can still drink it. We just don't like the flavor. And when they go in the winter to being more hayed instead of grazing in the grass, we can tell a difference then. But ultimately, to us, the taste doesn't change that much. It's not so drastic that I can drink a glass of pasteurized milk versus raw milk and know the difference. So if you're worried about taste, not a concern. One of the greatest benefits we've seen from drinking the raw milk in our house versus drinking pasteurized milk is my son, who had chronic diaper rash his entire first year of life. We could not get rid of it. He had eczema, he had diaper rash, he was bleeding every single diaper change. We could not figure it out. And we were putting the diaper rash cream on it. We took him to the pediatrician. They said, here's some steroids, put that on there. And I asked him, I was like, you're fine with me putting steroids in the diaper area for a prolonged period of time? They're like, there are no issues with that. And to me, I was not comfortable with that. That did not seem like a good solution to this diaper rash problem. Once we started giving him raw milk instead of the formula and the breast milk that we were giving him prior, all of his skin issues cleared up. Within 3 days, he was completely clear. He has not had another diaper rash since. That's not true, because sometimes when we're out and about and we forgot milk, we do have to just buy pasteurized milk at the grocery store, at the convenience store, whatever, so we can give him some milk. And we can tell that he's had pasteurized milk because he gets diaper rash again. But the raw milk cleared him up and he has not had another skin issue since. I steam the milk to go in our coffees every morning. We use it in all of our cooking, all of our baking, anything that you would use milk for, you can use raw milk for. There's no issues. And again, I asked on social media if anyone has ever had any issues with raw milk, ever gotten sick from raw milk. It's one of the most dangerous foods out there, according to the CDC. And every single person I know says they've never gotten sick. They've drank raw milk most of their lives. They've never gotten sick. Nothing's ever been an issue for them. And that's you guys. I asked you. The key is to trust the source. You know what a cow should be eating. Most people can look at a cow and tell if it's really sick or if it's not. Knowledge is power in this situation. And now that you know that pasteurization is not necessary for your milk, I hope that most of you would start to look into laws and see if you can buy raw milk. And maybe you try it and you don't like it, that's fine. But the effects that it can have on your gut is amazing. And the effects that it can have on your brain, just knowing that you're pushing back against the man a little bit more. But of course, until next week, my friends, stay skeptical and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast written, hosted, and produced by me, Danny Mercy. Special thanks to Lindsay for research and writing. If you love the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening. Follow us on social media at rabbit.holepodcast and visit our website at stayskeptical.com for everything else.